Now that you've had a chance to take a look at some of our basic definitions of learning, some of which are more complicated than others, of course, I hope this will help frame our conversations about this topic throughout the unit. Because although learning, because it's very broadly defined, acquiring new and relatively enduring information and behaviors, that's going to include a lot of stuff. There are also things that are not going to fall under the umbrella of learning, and you looked at some examples of those things that might be due to temporary drug states, for example, things that people are just maturing out of or growing out of that thing. We might not quite count those, but because this definition of learning is so expansive, learning is a process that can be observed in all kinds of different organisms, even very simple ones. And I think that there's some hope in that, especially given that we've come through some rather difficult units together to this point in the school year. And sometimes people get kind of down on their hopefulness about their ability to learn stuff, but any type of learning is based on simple mechanisms that are kind of foundational to all creatures. So it's something that we're all capable of. Now, not all creatures are capable of learning how to factor quadratic equations, for example. Like, that's not what the sea slug is doing. Your textbook actually describes some research that was conducted on this particular species of sea slugs, which apparently, as a protective maneuver, will withdraw their gills. But they also have to be able to learn that in some circumstances, like when they're faced with startling stimuli or feedback from the environment, that stuff is benign. So they shouldn't respond to it because it's repeatedly been presented in a non-threatening kind of way. So, for example, sea slugs will learn very quickly that if they're in choppy water, they don't need to withdraw their gill, although they will do that if you unexpectedly squirt them with water. However, just like when they're in the choppy water, if you repeatedly squirt them with water, although they'll withdraw their gills at first, because that's a protective type of maneuver they engage in, with repeated squirts of water, they'll learn to kind of not pay attention to it because they've essentially learned that it's non-threatening. And that's a very simple type of learning. We call that habituation, when after repeated presentations of the same, usually noxious kind of stimulus, people stop responding to it, and animals do it too. Now, before we move on, I'm going to actually pause here, and I want you to talk about with your table buddy how this concept of habituation that I just described and that your textbook defined for you in Module 26 is different from a process that we learned about in our last unit, sensory adaptation. I bet you can spot some differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well, and understanding the differences and similarities is going to be really important for distinguishing between these in a way that's going to allow you to write about those differences, for example, like on an FRQ.